Hi, alchemists, and welcome back to another episode of Elemental Educator. If you're joining us for the first time, thank you so very much for tuning in, and welcome to a place where we redefine leadership and challenge the status quo. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to Elemental Educator on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast from. And check out our website, elementaleducator.com. There you'll find this podcast, blog posts, discussion forums, a contact link to join us for a future episode as a guest, and our Elemental Educator workshops that offer insightful, empowering, and highly engaging professional development. Today, we're diving into the complexity and often misunderstood realm of student discipline and support. Joining me is Sandra Graybill, a dedicated dean of students with a wealth of experience in higher education and high school settings. Sandra's approach to discipline is not about punishment, but about growth, understanding, and creating a supportive environment for students. I can't wait to dive into this episode with Sandra, where we unpack how to handle student discipline. So get ready to let the alchemy of education ignite your passion for learning.
This is the Elemental Educator, the podcast where we kindle the fires of dialogue with the alchemists of education. We're here to embark on a journey where ancient wisdom meets the contemporary world of education. On Elemental Educator, we dive into the deep waters of adaptability, feel the grounding earth of core values, ride the swift winds of change, and ignite the fiery spirit of risk-taking. Fire, earth, wind, water. This is the Elemental Educator, and now your host, Tyler Comeau.
Alchemists, welcome back to another episode of Elemental Educator, and this time we're all in trouble because we are under investigation, going through discipline. I'm sitting here with Sandra, who is going to tell us how much trouble we're in. Sandra, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
It's my pleasure. I can't wait to unpack your lived experiences with you. I'd like to kick off with just unpacking what your background is.
Yeah. So I went to university. I did my undergrad at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, where I played Division I soccer, and ultimately ended up stopped playing after my freshman year due to injury, and really just got more ingrained in the academic environment of the university. So I quickly just started getting really involved with different student organizations and stuff like that. And I actually held an internship in the admissions office at the University of Green Bay, where I coordinated high school visits. So high school groups, pre-college programs would come to the university, and I would organize their entire visits and tailor what their visit was based on the needs of the group. If it was a diverse student group that was coming in, I'd made sure that they had ample time in our multi-ethnical cultural center, that they had a speaker from that environment and those kinds of things. If it was a STEM school, I would try to work with the different science and engineering departments to get a professor to come in and talk to them and just get them excited about university, given that sometimes the age ranges were elementary to middle to high school. Tried to tailor programs towards their needs. And then in my senior year, I realized, I can actually work at a college and do what I'm doing in a professional setting. And so started applying to grad schools with a higher education concentration and got accepted into Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where I started my program in higher ed leadership. And through that, I got an assistantship in the Office of Student Conduct. So that started my path towards discipline, towards helping students and young adults start to understand their decision-making process, especially as it relates to when they've gotten themselves into a situation that they have to think through from a reactive stance. So I did that at Western while I was working through my master's, and then got a job at Wichita State University in Wichita, Kansas, where I essentially was the lead for all academic misconduct, behavioral misconduct. I facilitated and supported all fraternity and sorority investigations, which was interesting. And then also towards the end of my career at Wichita, I was trained to do Title IX work. So Title IX investigations and sit on boards that would essentially make outcomes regarding to those cases. When I started at Wichita State, I was in office for, 6 or 7 months. And then the pandemic happened. and we were all like confined to our spaces. I stayed remote for about a year and then called my parents and was like, I have no family and no friends in Wichita. Like, I can't continue to sit in this 800 square foot apartment anymore. Can I just come home and visit you all? So came back to Minnesota. My family was gracious enough to allow me to like bounce from house to just still hang out. And ultimately started looking for different jobs and found a job at De La Salle High School in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It's a private Catholic high school where I obtained the Dean of Students position. So been there for now going on my third school year, currently in my third school year. And I love it. The role is far more proactive than in my previous roles. My previous roles were very reactive in that students would violate policies or they'd get into situations where a report would be filed against them, and then we would walk through the conduct process. And although that's still the case in my current role, there's a lot more proactive work that I do to engage with students about how you make better decisions so that you don't find yourself into a situation where now all of a sudden we have to talk about discipline measures. So that's my career in a nutshell. And I'll soon be beginning my principal license at St. Mary's University of Minnesota in Minneapolis. My principal licensure, and then for 6 more credits is an additional master's. So, yeah.
Good for you. That's incredible. And a whole autobiography here. Here we go.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. It's a lot.
No, that's awesome. There's so many things within that I want to take some time and make sure we unpack and we investigate. And I want to go back to your first few decisions you made. Why did you choose to get in and start following education?
Yeah, so I really liked it. I studied communications and was looking into going into public relations and organizational communication, and pursued different kind of internships and practicum experiences in that realm. And it just wasn't speaking to me. And although I'm still very much using my communication background in terms of crisis response in terms of situations, I really fell in love with the idea of helping students fall in love with education and fall in love with learning. And that's more or less what happened with me. I was an athlete through and through. Education was more or less secondary, but my sports and my athletic ability always got me to the places I needed to be academically and educational wise. And then when I had to take a step back as it relates to athletics, I really was like, okay, let's give this school thing a try. And so that's where I kind of fell up with the process of learning and helping students find their niche. And I think in the higher ed setting, I don't know how it is in Canada, but I think there's a lot of push towards just going to college in the US.
Would be the same here too.
Yeah, and there's so many other things students can do, and not to mention the financial aspect of going to university. And so really helping students understand what it is they're interested in and pursuing outside possibilities if they're not fully committed to a 4-year degree. And although I am fully believe in going to college, I fully believe in the power of graduating from a university and those kinds of things. There's so much additional opportunities for students in technical colleges and trade schools and those kinds of things as well. And so now the shift in the high school setting is more or less helping them develop that frontal lobe as quickly as possible, even though biology says it develops and it takes time, but helping students realize that not only their actions have consequences, but the intent versus impact based on the decisions they're making. I have a lot of conversations with students about you didn't intend to do that, right? It wasn't your intention to do that, but your actions have an impact, and you have to recognize what that impact is.
Absolutely. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit with this next question and just go, what you're trying to do is really cool. You're differentiating for the kids. You're trying to help them find their paths and become unique in their own way and whichever path they want to take. Why do you care to do that though?
Yeah. So my gosh, some days answering that question is harder than others because you get in those situations that you're like, just figure it out. But ultimately, I think I'm Catholic myself. And so working in institutions that were not faith-based to now being in an environment that is faith-based has opened my mind up and quite honestly made me not only patient as a person, but more humble as a person to be able to sit in those moments of difficulty with students in terms of helping them just become an exceptional human being. I oftentimes say this a lot in my office, that the world needs better humans. And when I ask my students, would you agree with that statement? They always say yes. Like, I never find a student say no, absolutely not. That we see it all over, whether it be social media, news. The world needs better humans. And I would argue the world needs better leaders in certain capacities as well. Yeah. And so when I'm trying to meet students where they are now, granted, working from a college setting where they're adults, right? And they've got far more lived experiences, far more things going on. To high schoolers, it's really meeting them where they are more than ever to better understand, okay, you made a decision. What were you thinking in that moment? And then unpacking their decision processing, because oftentimes they're not thinking, and that's the problem. And so really it's just helping them understand why they're thinking the way they're thinking and bringing in some psychology along with it. But ultimately, I think high school is such pivotal years in the formation development of character, of attitudes, of realizing that the world is bigger than themselves, and helping them transition into those next phases. And quite honestly, I think high school behavior has always been risky. We could always argue that. But I think with the amount of resources, the amount of technology, whether that be social media, the amount of substances that are just really accessible, and those kinds of things, it's really helping them understand thinking greater when they're making those decisions, those risky decisions.
And you brought it back to, and I'm trying to really get to the why, and you touched on it at the very start when you talked about moving to a Catholic-based division in which you work
Sure.
in. Correct me if I'm wrong. I interpreted from that you're rooted in helping people grow to be better humans for society.
Yeah. Yeah. So the school that I'm at, De La Salle, our founder is St. John Baptist De La Salle, and he's the patron saint of teaching. And I think regardless of what we do, we all have the capabilities to be a teacher, to be an educator, to be a guider, a mentor, and those kinds of things. And I think now more than ever, I've really felt this year, more in particular, I felt that calling of the why, because when I came in the 2021-22 school year, came in with a group of freshmen, and you could tell that it was like they had been online for 3 years. They didn't really know what the school was. And to really walk through their education and their high school career with them, and now they're juniors. And I love the junior class just because not only I came in with them, but the amount of growth that I've seen in all of them is just been really tremendous. And I'm lucky to say that I'm a dean at a smaller school. So we have roughly 700 students. And so I know almost all of them by name, and I know that their families, and I know their interests and their likes. And it's really them knowing that I care about them is also the why, that I do care about them, and that I do want to help them be successful and become exceptional human beings. And so it's been a really fun journey to walk along with them in their high school careers. And you can just tell they're so ready to be seniors, and they are like, Miss Graybill, you're gonna cry when we graduate. And I'm like, yeah, it's likely gonna be very possible that I'm gonna cry when you guys graduate. Just the amount of growth that I've seen within the students has been really the why to that the work that I'm doing. Although sometimes I walk away from my office being like, what is going on? There are those consistent memories and experiences that kind of confirm and have a lot of affirmation in terms of the work that I do.
And those affirmations, I would actually say they're validating your what. And your why is still, you're doing it to grow kids because you want to have a better society moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
Everything you're doing, kids knowing that you care, kids making those comments to you, that's the what, and that's the how, and that's the validation. But the why driving it, your core value is rooted in wanting to create a sustainable society of just good humans. And so it huge roots into the impact of what you're trying to do, which is awesome that you're pursuing your leadership certificate, and you're pursuing, I think you said it'll work you towards the masters. Hopefully we get towards the masters at that point.
Yeah. So the program it's a principal licensure program. So it's a licensure program, but for 6 additional credits, I get an additional master's on top of it. So
There you go. Very cool.
Yeah.
So at what point in your journey so far did you, or maybe you haven't been there yet, but did you realize that teaching was your calling and it was the right decision to make?
I feel like that's a question that I'm always still trying to figure out, because I'm not in a classroom with them. I'm their advisor, and I get on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'll get 45 minutes with them where we'll sit and we'll engage in conversations, and we'll work through challenges and have community building time. And I think that's also the big reason for why I want to pursue this additional master's, is because I don't have the teaching background. And I feel like there's so much to gain from having the curriculum design knowledge, because I think everything that I do is hard skills, right? Or are more along the lines of helping them make better decisions and think through their decisions. And there's so much that overlaps between what they learn in the classroom and what they're learning in the real life and how to apply it. And so the curriculum component and how we can overlap the two so that they're getting they're not just learning math, right? That they're learning how to have integrity within doing math, or if they're in a principles of engineering class, how they have integrity within doing that. Because if they go on to their college career and they say, okay, I want to go into aerospace, right? You have to have integrity. You're dealing with people's lives. And so helping that foundation of helping them develop those skills so that it continues to build as they grow and mature and who they are as a human being.
Was there a defining moment, though, where you said, yeah, that was the right call, I'm in the right spot?
I think, I feel like last year I had it in terms of, because I wasn't sure if I liked being in the high school environment. I had, 4+ years in the college environment. I really liked the investigative nature of that role. I really liked getting complex cases come in and incident reports and picking them apart and determining what policies were violated, conducting the interviews, determining what roles people played. And I do, although miss that component of it, I find that the role I'm in right now is just far more rewarding, because I get to have more relationships with the students. And I think that also drives the what. I'm a very relational centered person. I like building relationships and supporting students and meeting where they are. And that didn't have that in the college setting. They would come in, it was very reactive, right? They violated a policy, they came in, they got their consequence, they left. And if I never saw them again, that was a good thing. I didn't get college students like coming back saying, thank you for punishing me about what I did. That didn't really happen. So,
and that doesn't really happen in K to 12 either. I don't have a kid that comes back and says, thank you for punishing me. But I do have kids that come back and say, I've grown a lot.
Yeah, thank you for caring about me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for remembering that we talked about my sick uncle. So it's a very different reward in a sense. And although, like I said, I do really miss the investigative nature of my previous roles, I still might have that in this role, in that when situations happen and I have to pick apart what occurred and talk to students and those kinds of things. And the biggest difference is just there's a little more drama as it relates to situations in high schools, because my office has a window and everyone walks by when someone's in my office and it's like, why are they talking to them? I'm like, it's none of your business. Go to class.
Every day, that's an everyday thing, right? Like people are pulled over by police. There's an ambulance at a place. There's a fire truck somewhere. Everyone slows down to see what's going on. It's the gawkers, right? Everybody needs to see what's going on. It's also important to address that in conversation too. So how do you go about navigating those waters? And change is going to happen when somebody comes and sees you. It's because something needs to change and is changing.
Yeah.
And you need to prep them that, hey, this is not necessarily going to sit well with others, and you will have nosy people.
Yeah. Oftentimes we talk a lot about retaliation. It's twofold, right? When there's situations that where if something happens and students come forward and say, hey, this is happening and I don't know how to handle it. We talk a lot about retaliation, and that it's good that they came, and chatted with me. But just because we have one conversation about what happened yesterday doesn't mean there isn't going to be something that happens tomorrow or today. And I don't need to know about that. I need to know about every step of the process. And then there's the other side of where students try to handle it on their own. And oftentimes that's what we're finding. Students try to just figure it out on their own until they hit a breaking point where they no longer can handle it. It's this huge ordeal. It's gotten way, way too much for them to handle, and they start engaging in behaviors that are inconsistent with what they should be doing. And oftentimes it's, why didn't you come to us sooner? It's, I can handle it myself. That's okay. But did you? Like, how did that go, right? And so helping them understand too that although there's situations that occur, not everyone needs to know about it. And I think that's oftentimes the hardest thing. Like, they'll talk to us, they'll tell us what happened, and then they'll go off to their friends and they'll talk about it, which then makes this situation bigger. And so I also have a lot of conversations with students about, like, when they have a former friend or someone that's talking about them or talking about a situation that they did or something like that. And I'm oftentimes like, I wonder what would happen if someone came up to you and said, "Hey, I heard that this happened. I wonder what would happen to this situation if you just said, 'Oh, okay, I don't want to talk about it,' and showed them no interest at all. You just dropped it. You acted like you didn't care about it, even though you might. I wonder what would happen." And oftentimes students are like, "I'm going to try that." And I'm like, try it. When people are trying to push your buttons, there's a reason they're trying to push your buttons. And if you're going to allow people to push your buttons, that's not going to do you any good. And so I think that's that concept is hard sometimes for students to understand. And adults, I get my buttons pushed all the times and I have to just be like, okay, just it's fine. Doesn't bother me, when like we all know it bothers us. So it's very much trying to figure out tactics and strategies for students to move on from situations, but also, supporting them in what occurs as well. And then there's situations that are, I think in schools, generally speaking, schools in America, again, I can't speak for Canada, but in America, there's this big, there's a lot of stress and anxiety around any form of weapons in schools and violence within schools, fighting within schools, and the ripple effect of when situations occur and how it impacts not just the school community, but the families, because we're all in a community, right? Everyone is in it together. And so making sure that we're doing what we can to provide a safe environment for students and that students can walk in the door and feel safe, feel comfortable, feel supported. But then we're also, being diligent when incidents occur that does create this sense of, is my child going to be safe? And that's not just unique to my position or my school, but any position, my type of position within a school is how to ensure safety and those kinds of things.
And that's a big push in Canada too. Just the last part specifically, how to ensure safety, make sure people feel safe when they come to your school. You mentioned pushing buttons, and people really push buttons. Very few reasons. They either don't have enough information and they get anxious about not being in the know, so they want to be, so they push to try to find it out. Or they push buttons to get a reaction because that's the one way that they can feel good, is to see somebody else in struggle, right? It helps validate where they're at in their points in life. We've segued from talking about how we love to build these relationships and we care about seeing the kid grow to getting into discipline. And I can already tell that maybe one of your values is being a rule follower.
Yeah.
But to go from there, you talked at extensive length here about the importance of conversations around discipline in the process and the aftermath of that. Why did you choose to go that route as well, on top of working with students as a counselor in an academic setting?
Yeah, so I think although I'm a rule follower and I love policies, and it's a weird thing, but I think oftentimes when we develop language around what students can or people can or can't do, we oftentimes miss the why we have these and why they exist and the thresholds to when we enforce them. And I find myself having a lot of conversations with students, although they did clearly violate a policy. I try to say, where's the education here? Like, where can we have a valid conversation, an educational conversation that doesn't result in a punitive action, where we can sit down and have a real conversation about your behavior,
Yeah.
the impact.
How
of
can
your
we
behavior. Yeah, and
how can we fail
learn from
forward?
it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I always say we can't go backwards, we got to go forwards, but I can't make you go forwards. I can't sit in your class and make sure you are on your iPad and engaging in what you're supposed to be engaging in your class, because we are an iPad school, thankfully. And so oftentimes it's students getting kicked out of class because they're using their iPad inappropriately, or they're not engaging in conversation, or they're refusing to do the assignment in question, or there's just this refusal of, I'm not doing what we're doing in this class. I don't want to do it. And so when I have students come to me, I'm like, what? Why are you here? They're like, you already know. And I'm like, yep, but I want you to hear. I want to hear you say, why are you here? And although, sure, they engaged in disruptive behavior and they engaged in disrespectful behavior, oftentimes the why they're deciding to not participate in the activity or the whatever's going on is, one, there's something bigger in their mind that's impacting their ability to make the right decision, whether that's outside things, whether that's impacting family stuff, all this stuff. Or they're so stressed out about another subject that they're so focused on that subject they can't get away from it and do what they're supposed to be doing. And so oftentimes it's just sitting with them in that moment of, look, I get you're stressed, but what's another opportunity for you to stay, hey, I'm stressed out, I need a mental break. And so I have far more educational conversations with students than like laying down the handbook to say, point one, you violated it. Point two, you violated it. Because I could do that. I could do my job.
That'll
like
mean
that,
nothing to
but
them. That will mean
no. And you completely miss the opportunity to have a conversation with them about that decision-making process. So now, granted, there is a threshold where like if a student's consistently coming into my space where it's like, we talked about this 2 days ago, like what's going on. So oftentimes then there's underlying things that are making that decision-making process a little difficult and unpacking what that is. And oftentimes then that's just having a conversation with those that are in their corner, their counselor, any learning support that they work with, parents, guardians, those kinds of things to say, how can we best support the student with where they're at right now?
Yes. And I want to jump in here and just say, so our elements are all within us, with the exception of our fire. I think we can get our fire sources externally, and that can really drive us to take risks and pursue things and have a lot of fun out there. But what often happens is we really drive our water of the decisions we make and the changes we implement and the wind on how we face the adversity around us based off of what our earth is and what our core value is. And from a principal lens, when I'm handling a conflict or a discipline situation, I actually say, what did you do to get here? Because it's not why are you here yet? It's what did you do to get here? And then once we know what happened in that classroom, then we can segue to why are you actually here? And we can unpack, you might have been talking during class, or you might have thrown something across the room. That's what you did. But why you did it, the teacher doesn't know. The teacher's not going to know why you did it. Only you're going to know why you did it. And that's what you need to bring forward to us. Now, I'm curious because whenever you deal the land of discipline and you get into investigations, there's had to be some tough goes where you're learning something the hard way here. And I'm just wondering if there's any stories you're willing to share or unpack about how you've learned how to support people better because of something that's gone the hard way for you.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing is making sure, kind of what I said towards the end was like, who's the student support system? Because I think it's really easy in education, whether that was in my previous role within higher education or this one, it's really easy to be siloed in our own departments, in our own offices, doing our own thing and missing the big picture. And there was one situation where I was, dealing with a student who had some mental health concerns, some severe mental health concerns, worked with our learning support staff. And there was an incident where I was just treating it as this one without looking at the greater picture of like mental health, additional learning support from our learning center, and how the lack of that knowledge really was impacting my ability to get through to the kid about what you're doing is not only inconsistent with what's expected of you, but like you're walking down a path where we're questioning whether or not this is a place for you. And by sitting in, we have weekly meetings that we're all in the same room talking about students that, whether it be discipline, social, emotional stuff, academic support, whether that's they just tore every ligament in their knee and they're out for 8 months. And so those are the situations. And recently I started submitting reports of high flyers that I'm dealing with so that everyone is in the same room to say, what am I missing about this student? Because that information that I've been able to obtain from various offices has been instrumental in terms of my understanding on where that kid is at. I don't know what I don't know. And I've oftentimes found myself in situations where I'm making decisions without having the full picture. And so I've done a lot of work around making sure that I'm connecting with those other offices and looping them in conversations because now oftentimes when a student gets removed from a class for being disruptive, and the teacher is better informed because of what the student is experiencing. Instead of being sent to me, they get sent to the learning center where it's a quiet environment where they can focus on learning. So they're in a different environment where now it's no longer a discipline matter, but hey, you're now focusing on what you need to do. Why don't you go to the learning center or the media center where you have a quiet space to work on things? And so I think that's the biggest thing that I've learned from mistakes that have been made in the past in regards to not properly notifying others that can better support a student based on what they need.
And that whole idea of transparency, it's so important, the kid. And what I've really enjoyed about your story so far is we've gone down this path very quickly towards talking consequences, issues with students, potential violence situations. And the whole flow of this conversation and the earth of this conversation, it's been rooted in the value of supporting the kid and figuring out their why. It has not been rooted in punishment reward systems where you did something bad, now we're just punishing you.
Right.
And even there are situations, and you referenced it, you've been here so many times so frequently, here's what you're doing wrong, right? But it doesn't turn into, okay, here's your consequence for it. Yes, you're going to have a consequence for it. But we first need to focus on understanding them and understanding why they'd be a repeat offender and what they need from support to move forward. So I just want you to know that I've really appreciated that story from you so far and that message of how those elements are influencing your process here. So along the way, transparency is one thing that you've mentioned that you've picked up on, and now it's helping you a bit further. What other habits have you built into your routines and practices that have impacted the way you're handling investigation processes?
Yeah, I think the other part of the transparency piece is just with their families, because any given day I'll handle between anywhere 20 to 45 little incidents, and properly communicating everything to families is essential, right? Because if they don't know what's going on at school, how can they engage in those conversations at home for really the correction of the behavior? Because I get them for 8 hours a day and I'm not their sole caretaker. I would love to be, but I'm not. And so when partnering with families, even if when it's really minor, hey, so and so threw an apple across the lunchroom and it could have been really dangerous, right? Super simple call home, but it does create a ripple effect of additional conversations that need to be had in that setting. And so when I'm juggling multiple different things at the same time and that feedback loop doesn't happen, that's oftentimes when we see that just patterns of behaviors continues. Really, the biggest thing too is just connecting with parents and guardians about what's going on and how to support the student, because what I'm experiencing at school is maybe inconsistent with what you're hearing from it when they come home and when mom's like, "How was your day?" And they're like, "It was awesome. It was a great day." When in reality, that maybe that not be the case. So really just juggling, like following up too with families and making sure I'm also always available for them. And I do get a lot of calls from families. I think the beautiful thing about being in downtown Minneapolis, our kids come from all over the place, like all over the metro. Kids come in, and so our school, we are one of the most diverse private schools in Minneapolis, which is awesome. And so it's also comical when I get calls from families saying, "I think one of your students is speeding." And I'm like, "Okay, I'll have a conversation about that when they get to school." They're like, "Hey, how was your trip to school today?" "Oh, it's fine." I was like, "Really? I heard from a community member that you were driving a little fast." They're like, "People know." I'm like, "People watch you, right? People know De La Salle. They know you wear your crest all over the city. We pretty much provide the amount of financial resources for the Starbucks down the street to stay afloat." So that's also the aspect as well, is that there's always people watching and having that feedback with families and those kinds of things.
And it's so important when you communicate with the community and the parents. If you call home every day and you just say, "Oh, Johnny's been a shithead again," and your kid, and that's what it is, you're not going to make any progress. You need buy-in, you need support from the parents because the kids need support from a full system, and the education system is just a part of that. So it's so important when you make that phone call home. I'm calling because I care a lot about Johnny and he made a mistake. I need your support as a parent, as a family, as a community to help me rectify this mistake with Johnny so that we can take steps forward. And when you do that approach, instead of just calling and saying this shithead Johnny threw an apple across the room,
Right.
the difference in reception that you get is huge. And it's all about that initial warning. And what you're really doing when you call and you have that transparency, you share your why, right? You share your core value. You're doing this because you believe in that society on a global scale can be better and should be better. And I'm not sitting here saying we need to punish everybody that's bad. I'm saying the people that are struggling are part of the reason we need to be better. And here's how we can do that.
Absolutely.
I've yet to call a parent and with that line and have that be met with, "Screw you, buddy. I'm going to go do my own thing."
Yeah.
But I have had teachers come to me and say, "I'm scared to call this parent."
Yeah.
Why? Come down to. Now,
Yeah.
it's not all sunshine and rainbows, right? Sometimes you do get families where the kid can't do any wrong and the parents aren't seeing what you're seeing at home, or maybe they are, but they're shy or something's causing them to not want to admit that. It's very different. But what we're really getting into there is that's a big indicator that we need some mental health support.
Yeah.
Right. And I know that this is something that you talk about as well. And you talk about the idea of building a rapport and trust and segueing to acts of professionalism with people. So how do you work with those difficult families and those difficult community members to ensure you're all aligned in what you're trying to do?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, there is this aspect of trust, right? And so if the family thinks you're just trying to get my kid kicked out of this school, we're already in the worst place possible, right? And it's not a matter of getting them kicked out of school. It's more along the lines of repairing the harm that was done and to how great that harm was and who was impacted and what was the decision making and how egregious was the decision making. And so the biggest thing is trust, right? There's also this other additional aspect of full transparency about what I know. Because I think oftentimes when families are in a place of there's this tension, it's coming from a place of not understanding everything, right? So they don't know what's going on, and there's additional layers of frustration, there's additional layers of anxiety because they want what's best for their child, right? And so that's a big part of especially in the worst case scenarios where a student is potentially looking at a dismissal type situation. It's being very transparent about the incident that took place, all of the information that I know, and based off the information that I know, that question of should they still remain a student and needing to figure that out. So that's what I've found too, is in the situations where situations have been difficult, it's because a piece of that has been missing, that information, that the incident that they're not understanding fully, they have unanswered questions, if still go undressed for hours on or days or a weekend, it stirs, right? That anxiety builds. And so a lot of it is when those significant situations happen, being overly available to answer questions and being transparent about the information that we know, what our cameras picked up. We're really blessed to have cameras that cover every inch of our school. We have vape detectors in every bathroom that not just detect vape smoke, they detect noise volumes. They detect if they detect if the sensor's been tampered with. They detect temperature in the bathrooms. So we are beyond blessed to be able to really this year have put a lot of resources into the amount of resources to truly understand a situation, because it's really tricky without that. I'm sure there's been lots of situations that you've dealt with where we have words against words and there is no truth, right?
Yep, and we don't have the video and we don't have the fancy
yeah,
sensor.
like all I have is a word against a word. And in those situations, that's the hardest. That's what I find is the hardest with families, because it's my child said this and I believe them. And that's great, right? That's where you're at and good. And then we have another child that says another thing, and that family is I believe them. So we're in a really difficult position where, again, it's words against words. They're both causing harm, right? Or maybe one is worse than the other, but there's no truth. And figuring that out is difficult. So we're super grateful to have the amount of resources that we have so that we can back up cameras. Even there was a situation in a parking lot and every inch of our parking lot is covered. We can run license plates and pull up exactly who the car belongs to. And so I think too, the kids have a better understanding that like they are really being watched. And now let me be clear. I don't sit at my desk and watch the cameras all day. The cameras are never up. Like I never have the cameras.
No, anybody
up
that's
unless
involved
I
in
need
education
to.
knows they run in the background, and you come to them when there's a report made and a time and a location, and you go back and check. Yeah.
Yes, and I've had teachers that are like, "Well, you have access to the cameras. Aren't you watching?" And I'm like, "No, I don't. If I was sitting at my desk and watching the cameras all day, that would be entirely problematic. I don't. That is not how I do my job.
It's like one of those movie scenes where it's the security jobs guard, and they still get through because they catch the time when he's not looking.
Right. Yeah. I still have a far more things to do on my plate than sit and watch cameras all day. And so I look at cameras solely when there's situations where I need to look at cameras. And I recognize that we are super blessed to have that. and to have that within our infrastructure, because it's not just what happens in the school environment, but being in, the center of Minneapolis, the radius of our school in terms of car thefts, in terms of assaults, in terms of gun violence is absurd. And that's not our statistics on our campus. That's the city, right? Any school that's located in the center of a huge city is going to have pretty tricky statistics as it relates to crime. And that's where we're at. And having not just cameras in the school, in the parking lot, but also looking out at all of the surrounding environments is also beneficial as well as it relates to school safety. And we're rewriting our crisis response plan, and that in of itself has been a hefty challenge. But we can't have a consultant come in and say, yeah, the geographic area of your school has got a lot going on, and then say, if something happens, right? Like, we have to be really proactive with knowing that information.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. What's really cool is unpacking the discipline side and the investigation side with you. We're unraveling another core value that you have in another part of your earth, which is that idea of transparency, because all of the decisions that you have to make in your investigation process and all of the changes you're implementing, and when you're faced with adversity, you said it yourself. It's about, you don't know what you don't know. And you're all about just collecting information around you, trying to be transparent, which is part of your earth, so that you can respond with the other part of your earth that's in you in doing what's best for people to help them grow and be better. So I think those two values within you are so powerful in how you address the adversity of the wind that you're faced with and the water of the change you're trying to implement within that. Now, I do want to segue a little bit. We are getting close to the end of our time here together, which makes me sad, because it's been nice to just sit here and listen and be a part of your lived experiences. I feel like I'm in your school. One, your school sounds high tech and really cool, but two, a little bit scary. Yeah. So I think it's somewhere in the middle of there for me. But who inspired you to get into what you're doing and really drive this?
Yeah, so I had a lot of mentors when I was at Green Bay that really helped me understand that working in education was a thing, and working in higher education more specifically was a thing. And then I would probably say my biggest mentor from my grad school is just my supervisor, who is the coordinator of student conduct at Western Michigan. He really helped me hone in on my investigation skills and become a better thinker, truthfully, and breaking incidents down in such a different lens, a different way. And I would say currently it's got to be my principal at the school that I'm at. He's a very thoughtful decision maker, a very thoughtful and intentional leader. And he previously was also a dean. So I got a lot of experience from him as well. But he's just a leader by example as well. And I think that's ultimately what anyone looks for when they look for mentorship. Don't just tell me what to do, teach me how to do it. And so he really is a really great leader in that regard, and handles things with a lot of grace, even in situations that are like, whew, I would hate to deal with that, but really is intentional and thoughtful about that.
I'll have to get you to give him the little nudge and say, hey, I did this really cool thing.
Yeah.
And you're
I was
up
thinking
next.
about him, actually. Yeah, I was thinking about him. I'll share it with him.
That would be really cool. Aside from who inspires you, what does your future look like? What are your next steps, Sandra?
Yeah, so I will begin my principal license program here in August. It's a 2-year program, and then the additional classes for the master's. And then I hope to just continue to work my way up within leadership. And I think having the administrative license and the principal license is obviously a pivotal next step. But I do foresee myself possibly being a vice principal and one day a principal. But I recognize that principals don't really have the direct hands-on approach as it relates to the discipline. And I think in our hour of conversations, you've probably picked up on that's my jam, and not everyone likes that. And so I've been talked to a lot about, wow, you really like this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I do. I don't know why, but I do.
And it's
so
not that you like to punish. It's that you like to see growth.
Yes, very much so. And I think, and that's the hardest thing too with the kids, is they only see me as the person that does punishments. And so until they get to truly know me and realize that's not my style. But yeah, so I do want to continue to do discipline for as long as I can. If one day I decide that, okay, I'm ready to oversee the discipline, I'm sure I'll make that next step. But I truly do appreciate being very hands-on as it relates to the discipline process.
Very cool. And you know what? Getting my master's, doing my leadership quality standards certification, and starting the doctorate, like it's opened a lot of doors for me. So good for you for pursuing more education, because being a lifelong learner, a lot of schools, it's cliche, they put it in their mission statements. But if you actually live and breathe it, it opens so many doors for you and where you can take not just your career, but your personal life too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what I oftentimes find myself in incidents where maybe I made a misstep, or in situations where families, there's a lot of pushback and a lot of anger within families. I spend a lot of time thinking through at what point was there something that I maybe could have done differently to try to learn from this experience. And not to say that I overthink everything I do, because that's not what it is, but it's more or less like there's an opportunity to learn in every situation that occurs. And so I always also look for that, like, where was that missed opportunity, or where did I maybe not make as an intentional decision to do XYZ kind of thing. But yeah, I'm in agreement with you that lifelong learning is important. And I'll be honest, that you being a principal, the kids that come in are very different than the kids that are going to graduate this year, right? Their ability to comprehend what's going on online, on social media, whether that's complex situations at home, mental health, like I foresee we're going to be seeing a lot more students that need a lot more support. And we have to be able to transition our schools to provide that, to meet them where they're at in order to help them be successful, or else what are we doing? So that's how I see it as well.
Sandra, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that if they want to continue the conversation?
Probably Instagram. That would be, or email, either or. My Instagram is Sandra, so Sandra _Catherine, Kathryn. And then my email is my full name, so Sandra, and then K, and then Graybill, Graybill @gmail.com.
Awesome. And this is my favorite part before we end every episode, is I always put you on the spotlight and I say, you've been on the spotlight this whole time. But if you could give one piece of advice to anybody listening around what you're doing, what advice would you give people?
I would say listen to understand, not to respond. You got to listen first to understand situations. You can't listen and already have your response in your mind. You got to really understand what's going on.
One of the 7 habits, right? Seek to understand.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
That's very cool. Sandra, thank you so much for taking time to join me. A little bit later here, once we wrap up this conclusion, we'll go back and we'll just re-record an intro here for us. But
Perfect.
I have really appreciated the time with you. I've learned a lot of perspective from your lived experiences. I know the listeners are going to hear a lot from your lived experiences. And I just thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
You've been listening to the Elemental Educator. Our aim is to illuminate optimal educational practices on a global scale. And second, we want to shine a light on the expertise and knowledge that Tyler brings to educational institutions. He's not just a talking head. He's a practicing educator, a school principal, armed with a master's in educational administration, and on the brink of completing his doctorate. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, find us on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Elemental Educator. And to contact us, fire off an email. See what I did there? Fire off. Okay. Send an email to elementaleducator@gmail.com. See you next time on the Elemental Educator.